episode 211 of the Downward Facing Spiritual Spiral podcast. How are you doing? I hope you're well. I'm Eddie Cohn, host, creator, producer of the podcast, of the show you're listening to right now, and thrilled you're here today. I am recording the intro in the afternoon. Normally I do the recording at night, but my cats have this tendency to be absolutely insane at night, so I'm going to try and record this quick intro before Leo and Nellie enter the studio and cause insane ruckus everywhere. Really thrilled to welcome Gaea Woods to the show. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist here in Los Angeles. And she's also an artist, a photographer. That's how I got to meet her. Probably been like 10 to 12 years ago I met her. And I have really been thinking a lot about mental health for a variety of reasons. I think, obviously, because of the virus that has sort of been omnipresent in our society over the last couple years. You know, health is a big part of my life, something I take very seriously. And as I'm watching all of these pundits and television personalities and politicians not really talking enough about mental health in our society. At what point are we going to take mental health seriously? And I know these are very difficult areas and subjects with a lot of nuance to talk about, and there's no quick, easy fix. But something that I think about a lot, you know, I've dealt with physical health issues, but I really do believe the mental state of the mind plays such a deep role in one's health. And I often think maybe it's more important than the physical. I mean, maybe the physical is happening because the mental health is unstable. The anxiety levels are so high. We don't know how to communicate. We don't know who to turn to. And I speak to Gaea about this, and obviously we talk about a lot of these subjects, but I really think so many of our issues today could be resolved or alleviated. Issues being issues relating to mental health. I think so many could be alleviated if we have people in our life that truly know how to listen and or make us feel like we're being heard. And unfortunately, I think there's so many agendas that I think people are distracted. I think the world, the tech-obsessed world we live in now, is really promulgating speaking, talking, looking, but what are we doing to slow down and listen? So that's part of the reason why this podcast is audio only. I've been asked and I've thought about making a video, but I really think so much of our world is visually based that I'm gonna hold tight right now and keep it audio only. So, Gaea, really means a lot that you took the time to speak to me on the show. Gaea's Instagram, I believe, is private, but if you type in Gaea Woods in Google, I'll certainly have links to her website in the notes of this show. But Gaea Woods, Gaea Woods. If you're looking for a therapist, if you know somebody who's looking for a therapist, reach out to Gaea. If Gaea's booked, maybe she knows somebody, but I just really think it's important to surround ourselves with people that can listen lovingly, with support, with no judgment. So hopefully this show, this episode, brings those important elements to light a little bit more. So Gaea, I really appreciate you speaking to me. Again, you can find Gaea online, type in her name, Gaea Woods, in Google. We'll get right to the show. You know where to find me on social, at Eddie Cohn, or the Spiritual Spiral podcast. You know, my book, Sexy Spiritual AF Yoga, is available now on Amazon. I have new music that's been slowly released over the last year. You can find it on Spotify. I have a new single coming out in a couple weeks. I've got another fantastic guest lined up later this week, Lee Hester. He's a singer-songwriter based out of Nashville. Remember, if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends. Head over to iTunes maybe and give it a 5-star review. And that is it. Gaea, thanks again for taking the time to speak to me. It was wonderful. And as always, thanks to you for listening, supporting, being a part of the Downward Facing Spiritual Spiral podcast. Likewise, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where
Are you still in the same spot that I photographed you at this point years ago now?
Gosh, no, probably. That's
No.
right. You actually, I think you did photos for me a couple times, I think. Yeah.
Did we do a couple sessions?
I know there was one in a studio that we did.
Yeah.
That was in like Van Nuys, but God, maybe, I don't know. It was quite a while ago,
Yeah.
but I feel like
It was a while ago.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're still here in LA?
I'm still here in LA. I'm in beautiful Los Feliz in my office. So, yeah.
I'm thinking a lot, but when I knew you first, you were immersed in the world of creativity.
Yeah, I was.
So, and I'm the thing about creativity, I feel like that sort of ebbs and flows and never goes away. But pre the world of psychology and therapy, although this could still be part of your life. But let's backtrack a long time ago, or maybe it won't be that long. But just like, what inspired you to sort of venture into the world of creativity and photography and other creative outlets? What was sort of your first taste with that?
Sure. You mean kind of like pre-psychology, pre-therapy, kind of just creativity world?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I guess probably I was always exposed to art and artistic practices growing up, but then I was a model when I was a teenager. I actually kind of left home and moved to Europe when I was just a bright little 16-year-old child, literally a child. And I actually did that professionally for a few years, and I liked it. It was a wonderful opportunity. I got to travel. Lifestyle wasn't a super healthy lifestyle for me.
Yeah.
But it really exposed me to photography, which is kind of what I wound up studying, which is what I wound up studying in school, and which is kind of what led me to a more kind of creative path. So I studied photography in undergrad, and then career-wise kind of worked kind of all avenues of that sphere. So I worked as an agent for commercial photographers for a number of years. And then I moved over to the agency side, and I worked in kind of entertainment advertising, which is, I know, where we kind of have a mutual friend from that.
Uh-huh.
And then I kind of launched out on my own and did my own kind of commercial photography practice. So and then at that point, I was really trying to kind of find a sense of like deeper meaning and connection in the work, and it just kind of wasn't like happening for me in a way that I really wanted it to.
Well, I'm curious about that because you're interesting, because there's sort of this duality element in the sense that I could easily talk for an hour with you about creativity, but I also have an incredible interest towards sociology and how tech and social media has impacted our life. But I think inspiration and creativity is such a valuable part of the human species and sort of our growth and just finding a way to express ourselves. And it's sort of this intimate relationship that we all have with our sort of inner voice, our inner artist. Mm-hmm. And I think it takes a lot of chutzpah and to put it all out there and try to pursue it potentially professionally. I think it's just... And I think now especially, the expectation is we all need to sort of reveal ourselves. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, everybody has a podcast and everybody's like posting this and that on social media. And there is this sort of intimate quality with art where, you know, the best artist could be flipping burgers at like In-N-Out or working at a hardware store down the street, but because they don't feel like putting themselves out there, and this comes with no judgment, you know, we'll never know of them.
Sure.
So, I mean, did you, and you were a model, I didn't even know that, where you're obviously putting yourself out there physically. Did you sort of feel this sort of intersection and confusion with, you know, being an artist and it seems like maybe this led to transitioning? I don't know, but what were some sort of hurdles and things that you were noticing in your own work, society, as you were pursuing that world of artistry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always, at least for me in my creative practice, it was always about trying to kind of blend it with kind of blend my vision of what I wanted to achieve with the goals of a client, or with, if it was me representing photographers, with trying to kind of, be a salesman of that person's work in a way that felt really authentic, and making sure that I only represented talent that I really could get behind, and just kind of trying to really blend something that felt like it was important on an artistic level with sort of commerce. And that always just felt really complicated.
Yeah.
And just sort of, at the end of the day, for me, was too much of a mental gymnastics for me to have to do to feel like I could kind of work with the types of clients that I would want to work with consistently, where I would feel really fulfilled and kind of like I was able to make the kind of work that I wanted to make. And so now in my photography practice, which I still do have a little bit of a practice, and I'm pretty busy as far as other career avenues and personal avenues as well, but at least now in my photography practice, I don't answer to anybody. So I get to make the work that I want, and that is really fulfilling for me when I do sort of get into the studio or do whatever practice I'm doing for a specific project.
Yeah. Was there sort of a tipping point where, again, inspiration? What was inspiring the transition into getting into therapy and
into therapy? Oh yeah. Well, I love telling this story because it's kind of a funny, happy accident that also does have a little bit to do with creativity in a way, and also starts with a breakup, like every good story.
Right.
So basically, I was going through a kind of a bad breakup and was just feeling like total shit. And I started a podcast with a close friend of mine.
Oh,
and the whole idea for the podcast was us to create a space where we could have really open conversations about, heartache and love and sex and dating and relationships, and just have it be a really kind of honest space to have these conversations. I realize this is also what many people think when starting a podcast, that their conversations with their friend are the most exciting and wonderful conversations. And so of course everyone's going to want to hear these conversations.
Right.
Maybe that's a little naive, but we made it really fun. And we made it kind of a Q&A show. So people would call in or text in with their love, dating, sex, relationship questions. And eventually love her, is a world traveler and has a very free spirit. And the scheduling wise, she was like in Bali for 6 months doing yoga. And so eventually it kind of became more my baby of a show. And so I started posting it with other kind of guests on, and I would interview people, and it just became a really wonderful, fun space to have these kind of really raw and deep conversations with either guests that would call in, or listeners that would call in, or with my guests that I would have on. And so what that opened up to was, in my personal life, people would just start approaching me with all their most intimate details of their lives, and just come to me with really wonderfully vulnerable questions. And it was the most exciting and just fun and invigorating kind of experience, because I love connecting with people on a kind of deep, vulnerable level, and hearing about the stuff that they're really struggling with, or the things that are really, vulnerable to them. And then people also kind of started telling me how comfortable they felt with me talking to me about these things, even though they didn't really maybe know me that well.
Right.
And so then it kind of started planting this seed of, oh, I could do this for a living. I could have conversations with people about, whatever they're struggling with in their relationships, and get paid for it and get trained in it and try to understand the sort of, science of behavior and of the mind and of these other kind of components of psychology that goes beyond just the kind of creating space for someone to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So hence the sort of transition.
So is this, God, there's so many things that I've jotted down and thought about, but is this the best of times, or I'm not going to say the worst of times? Is this the most anxiety inducing time ever? Or do we only know what we know? Like 30 years ago, did people think that that was, the greatest of times to live, but also incredibly traumatic at points? I have a sort of a glass half empty perspective on the world when it comes to sorry, don't forget what I just said, because I often ask a question without asking a question. But I, for one, love actually hearing people's voices. I for one love phone calls. And I feel like people like me have a hard time navigating this tech-obsessed, convenience sort of takes precedent over everything. Like, I know it's not as convenient to have a phone conversation. Everybody just wants to text. But I'm reminded every time I have a guest on the show, every time I have people over for dinner or lunch, I need those types of three-dimensional elements. Yeah. So back to sort of what I was originally saying, is this, as a therapist, are you, what's your perspective on sort of what's going on and the sort of the influx of insane technology going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different ways that technology can obviously enrich our lives, but also, we had kind of touched on when we were emailing about kind of talking about social media a little bit. And I think that, that is one of the areas that it gets really complicated, because there is such a slippery slope of comparison and kind of getting in your head about where you should be versus where you're at. And that can bring up a lot of anxiety, and that we're all kind of so connected to each other, and we can get in touch with each other at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
And that's maybe actually not good. I mean, a lot of that is not good, especially the comparison part, but the being able to kind of access everyone's lives so easily and so readily is not normal, and is maybe not healthy for our brains or for us as kind of social creatures.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing. We are social creatures, and so I think our experiences are enriched being socially active, but I think there's a strange, almost hypnotic trance or trickery happening, because all of these sort of face-to-face experiences, look, I don't know if the statistics are right, but if you listen to this podcast, not this one, mine, but if you listen to this one or that one or whomever's, they'll all say that depression is on the rise. Teenage suicide is greater than ever before, specifically with women. And these are coming from the New York Times and Johns Hopkins and reputable health institutions. So, I don't know if I'm being hyperbolic, but one can also say, how do you analyze these great problems just by statistics? So, everybody is their own, has their own nuance to their own experiences. I think we need social connection, and we obviously are social creatures, but I think we're being tricked to use, to sort of implant these social activities, but we're using a phone instead. And I think that potentially is where some of the problems might be might be coming from.
Yeah, just the kind of clunkiness of the devices and of the ways that we're trying to connect with each other.
I mean, a lot of your, obviously for, private reasons, I don't want you to reveal any personal information, obviously, but when you started your practice, how is it sort of, have you noticed a shift in clientele, or especially over the last couple of years because of the pandemic, but then, do you see a shift because of, is it easy to say it's because of technology, it's because of social media, or is it not that simple? Is it much more nuanced than that?
Oh, that's a big question. I think the pandemic is sort of a separate issue. It's so hard to kind of combine the pandemic with social media or just with technology, because I think it is a really difficult time for a lot of people, right now during the pandemic, even though things are opening back up, and it's, I don't know, here in Los Angeles, we're having kind of another mini wave. I don't even know if they're calling them waves anymore. It seems like everyone's so sick of talking about it. But, I think the pandemic obviously has been incredibly difficult on people's mental health. And I know I'm certainly, getting a lot more phone calls than I would be, than I was a couple of years ago, let's say. But I think that is still a super separate issue from kind of how technology interfaces and how we kind of stay connected with technology. And I think it also depends per kind of age group too, because I think, I work with some teen clients in my practice, and it's so interesting the way that, they use technology and social media, and it's sort of just like another body part is their phone, or it's just like it's a part of their lives. And yeah, you could say, oh, it's ruining people's attention spans, or people are so distracted, or you're chasing the dopamine of the getting the like on your Instagram photos or whatever. And that might all be true, but it also lets people stay connected, and it is a social space, and there is a sense of that sort of peer acceptance that is so important, which I think also the flip side of that is when that kind of turns around and then you feel rejected, or you're cyberbullying, or whatever kind of specific evil there is on the social media space, which there's lots of evils to it. But I think that it's always going to be something that, exists in a teenager's life in a way that's actually really helpful, but of course comes with its downfalls and sort of downsides as well.
Yeah. I mean, for you, do you put boundaries? Are you aware of like, oh, I've been on this social media platform for a half hour, I need to stop? Or, I've just watched 5 episodes in a row of Netflix and my brain is not, do you sort of have these strict, quote unquote policies where you're aware of how it's affecting your brain? What do you do to sort of navigate that?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's more just about trying to be aware of what my intention is if I'm using social media, or if I'm just using my computer, or if I'm watching TV, or if I'm on my phone, just really kind of being straight up with what I'm wanting out of it. And so recognizing if I'm wanting to just zone out and just have like a really silly, dumb, kind of mindless show experience at the end of a hard day, just doing that and having that be okay, but not lying to myself and, binge watching 5 episodes and thinking that I'm going to like get something really meaningful out of this experience. And similarly with social media, trying to be more, active when I'm using it in a way that makes me feel good. So kind of trying to avoid some of the just mindless scrolling and be more intentional about like searching for friends that I care about and seeing what they're doing. If the algorithm has taken all of their stories away, or, I'm not kind of seeing them, or actually messaging people on there and trying to kind of have conversations that might be slightly more casual than a text message, but still is meaningful in some way, versus again, just kind of mindlessly being sucked into something. So for me, it's just knowing what I'm trying to get out of something, and if I'm trying to kind of stay connected, or if I'm trying to kind of dissociate, or just kind of like get out of my head, then being honest with myself about those times, and then potentially not engaging with technology and maybe trying to figure out what's really going on with me that I kind of want to escape, or that I kind of want that extra dopamine hit of, a like or whatever it is that I'm kind of searching for.
Yeah. Isn't it funny though how I was thinking 2 things as you were talking. Like before social media and tech, we got to know people over, I think, a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years, whether it was in school or friendships. And I don't like how I make judgments about people based on what they post on social media. Like it's weird. And also I don't like how, as an artist, I don't like how social media makes me think about what people think. Mm-hmm. Do you know? It's weird. Like, to your point, yes, it connects us. They can feel very innocuous, but I do think, I think it's really reshaped humanity and such a dramatic way. And I think all I'm trying to do here is make people aware of, are you reacting this way because this is actually truly how you feel, or is it because of algorithms, or you're tired and you've spent the last half hour just scrolling? I think is self-awareness something that you sort of talk about in your practice, and how important, and how do we even achieve self-awareness? Is that something that could be taught, or I don't know, especially these days?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm sort of what's the metaphor is, to a hammer, everything is a nail,
Yeah.
I think is the saying. But I think that usually with my clients, I wind up talking about social media when it's a problem. So when it's something that is either consuming too much of someone's time, or they're comparing themselves to people on social media and feeling bad about their lives, or they're looking at an ex's Instagram too much, or, an ex's social media. So I guess in those types of situations, when it's coming to a situation where it's causing a problem, then we try and kind of break down the problem. And so I would kind of just say that similarly is always kind of going to be helped by, if you're being mindful of what is the intent that you're trying to use something. And in that way, I think to answer your question, you definitely can teach self-awareness through practices like mindfulness, and through, checking in with yourself before you use social media or your phone or whatever it is, during and after. Similar to like you would if you have a friend in your life and you're not sure how you're feeling about that relationship, or a dating relationship, just checking in with yourself before you see the person, during when you're spending time, and then after. It's a super simple, sort of mindfulness, quote unquote, exercise, but it's really just trying to help you understand your feelings about something. And at that level of just sort of baseline understanding, you can make a lot of decisions about, is something actually enriching your life, or is it kind of causing you some amount of suffering that maybe you can cut out pretty quickly.
I was just thinking, as you were speaking, the other area that is interesting to me with social media is, and yet not even just like the world, like sort of to your point earlier where you're making fun of your own podcast. Like it feels like we all think that everything we say or do is so relevant and so important and worth sharing. And it's sort of, I think it's sort of added this strange narcissistic quality to the world. Like everything we do is worth sharing or valuable. But then I sort of coupled with, I was even thinking as a therapist, you're only hearing one person's, granted, you could be also a couples therapist, but you're only hearing one person's side of the story. Mm-hmm. And I was even thinking a judge or a jury, or like these videos we see where we're racing to judgment, but all we hear is one side of the story. And I do feel like so much of our world and our lives these days is reacting to one side of the story. A reality is shaped based on, I think, two sides of the story or multiple sides of the story. So
yeah, well, as you were talking, I was also very much agreeing that, the way that we share information now is kind of narcissistic, to think that everyone is going to think that our lives are so special because we're sharing them. But also just the funny part about that, like, you can really care about someone, but not need to know so much about them, and not need to kind of have so much information, the constant story updates, which, I love Instagram. I'm updating my stories all the time. I love sharing stuff about my life. And I also try and maintain a realistic understanding that a lot of people are not going to care, and that's fine. I'm happy if like my few friends see my stories and respond with like sweet thing. Like that's good enough for me. But I think that it is a strange experience to kind of get caught up in, and to kind of delude yourself into thinking that you're so special and that everyone, should care about, whatever it is that you're doing. And maybe that sounds cynical, but I think that it's coming from a place of that we all have a limited amount of time. We all have busy lives, and there's a kind of a fluffiness to a lot of the social media stuff that I see that I don't have emotional energy for. I don't have kind of the, it's like just, it's not that it's unimportant, but it's too much information. It's just like too overwhelming. And maybe that's also because I'm a pretty social person, and I do have a lot of friends that I follow on Instagram and on social media. And when I look on there, I do want to kind of know, but I get too overwhelmed, and it's too much details. And to your point earlier about the importance of that kind of one-on-one connection, I find myself, after scrolling for a long time, just wanting to connect with people on a deeper level over a phone call, or, text a friend, or, do something that has more of a kind of slightly deeper meaning, or a little bit more kind of personal connection that I feel like I'm choosing.
Yeah. It's weird. I was thinking about that person. Triggered is the sort of in word right now, and I hear this. I feel like it's weird. I'm conflicted by it because so you could be out at a bar or at a restaurant, and somebody says something really negative and derogatory, and it really hurts your feelings. And I can see, and people, that are out there judging will say, well, you still can't hit them, or you can't take out a knife. And like, I get that. Like, no, you can't hit somebody or take out a knife. And there's this person at the Dave Chappelle concert who was saying that, who walked on stage with a knife. He was saying that he felt triggered, or I don't remember if it was a woman or a man, but anyway, they felt that they were triggered. So I guess my point here is that I sympathize with people that feel triggered, or I sympathize with people that have their feelings hurt, because I think there's a lot of things out there right now that are really hurtful. And I think we're all actually really sensitive, and I'm not condoning violence and taking a knife, but words do have this strange power, or maybe it's not strange at all, where they feel, maybe because the emotional damage is so intense, that it almost feels like a wound to the chest.
Yeah.
I didn't have a question at all, but I was hoping I was going to say something that would make you think about something, but I think
I could elaborate.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I just think it's really, I think feelings, and you work in this world of feelings where I think you have to probably respect where everybody's coming from, because to your one point, we can feel very narcissistic in this world, but they are my feelings, and this is how I'm feeling about a particular event or person. So you have to respect that. Yeah.
Well, and I think, one thing you're kind of bringing up is just what are the different spheres that you're having a conversation about your feelings, and kind of what's an appropriate space to have a conversation about, quote unquote, feeling triggered. I was just listening to a podcast actually yesterday about therapists sort of shaming each other online.
Oh my God, that's really appropriate.
Yeah, well, and it was so funny because it is a thing that happens in a lot of these sort of like online therapy groups, where someone will pose a question or will say something, and other therapists respond in such a way that is really not very empathetic or understanding or creating space for everyone to have their unique opinions. And it just kind of highlights for me the difficulty of having kind of somewhat personal conversations in a public space, like a Facebook group or on Instagram, and so I think it's about trying to figure out, especially given the sort of political climate that we live in, where there's a lot of people who are really angry and, feel really upset with how the state of the world is, and for good reason. But I think it's a matter of when can you have a conversation? Like, what is the safe space to have a conversation? and what is going to result in people actually listening to each other versus just shaming each other for their positions, which is, of course, highly unproductive.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they may not be colleagues of yours, but just this idea that there are other therapists that are shaming one another online. And newscasters or political leaders or, having these conversations in a public forum isn't the same as having a face-to-face conversation. It's just sort of, no wonder, I don't know. Sort of back to my original point, do you think the world is as bad as it feels, or do you think it's always sort of been good and bad?
Oh, man. That's a pretty big question.
No, I know. Well, I mean, it's weird. I struggle. It feels like the news media and the media sort of want this constant state of distress.
Sure.
And I was just in Kauai celebrating my birthday a couple weeks ago, and didn't have the news on. I mean, and I'm pretty aware of. I give myself, 10 minutes of news time, and that's about it. 10 minutes of Twitter, but it's almost like this world we live in it's perpetuating this stressful society. Like it thrives on anxiety. And when I was in Kauai for 6 days, I didn't know about anything going on, and I often say to myself, if we avoided all of this toxic energy, if we just and it's not about living in a bubble, but how much of the world sort of thrives on having us sort of be anxious and worried.
Sure.
So that's sort of something I think about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great question, and is something that I do talk a lot about with my clients too, just in terms of how to kind of strike a balance of staying engaged, but also whether it's with news or, even just kind of facing, one's sort of inner demons or trauma is how do you kind of strike a balance between, looking at the news and getting so dysregulated that you feel hopeless about the world, or, doing so much trauma work that you feel like you're living in a space of re-traumatizing yourself and not having new experiences and, reinvigorating your life in some way. And I think it really is just about creating a balance to kind of have the, not having blinders on, but being able to kind of take things in and then kind of close things out and have there be some kind of an internal regulation system that you've created that works for you.
Yeah. Were you think back, how long have you been a therapist for?
Well, it's a good question. I have been in private practice since 2018. And then before that, I was in some more kind of community mental health and nonprofit spaces. But yeah, private practice since 2018.
How was that first year or two? Because, I'm thinking about your friends feeling comfortable telling you some intimate details.
Sure.
And I can tell just talking to you now that you do have this grace and ease in which you communicate, and I can tell you're listening. But it must have felt like a whole other animal or beast when you're actually going into an office and somebody you don't know is coming to you for advice.
Sure.
So
well, I'm lucky that I, and I think that's a kind of a broad question about what's it like to be a therapist. And I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think it did feel like a lot of pressure in the beginning, and definitely gets a lot easier as you kind of understand that you're never going to have all the answers. It's not necessarily that my clients are coming to me, for advice as much as it is that they expect that I have some kind of training and, expertise and license and grad school and all the hours of, work that I've put into this, but also that but I will be able to hold space for them and really just listen to them and then try and work towards creating solutions that will work for them and trying to, come up with something kind of collaboratively with, again, an integration of the skills and training that I have, but also just on a human level, having someone to help you and support you and also kind of challenge you, I think can be enormously transformative for people. So once I kind of started thinking about it on that level and kind of got out of my way of thinking I needed to know every single criteria for every diagnosis that might exist in the DSM that might walk through my office and then present with a certain set of problems. They're just people that I'm talking to people. I'm a human being. I've had a whole life of talking to people and relating to people. And so trying to understand that I have experience sitting with people and listening to people. And that's kind of what I needed to rely on in the beginning, really helped me get through some of that early anxiety and just the, imposter syndrome of like, how can I help someone with their problems if I'm also like a human being in the world with my own problems?
Yeah.
So, and wonderful supervisors and, great training and all of that. So.
Looking back on my time in therapy, I had really great experiences, but I think it's so valuable to find somebody, whether it's a partner or a therapist, to tackle and talk it out. I think, and that's why I think journaling is really, I love to journal, just why is it, give me some reasons or examples of just the benefits of just sort of like letting it out, be it going for a walk or run, seeing you or journaling. What's the almost neurological effect that has? Why is that so important?
Of just kind of like processing and like showing up for yourself in a way, or
yeah, but also just like sort of like vomiting it all out, getting it out, whether it's like journaling or seeing you or calling a friend. I mean, why is that process of just getting it out so helpful and important?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that at least my sort of theoretical orientation around therapy relies on is this idea of making the unconscious conscious. So trying to understand the parts of our psyche that otherwise are unconscious and are going to be kind of ruling our lives without us really knowing. And sometimes it can truly be as simple as, like you said, just vomiting it out and just trying to process and trying to sort of put words to the things that might not totally make sense and that we're still kind of, having some sense of internal conflict around and don't really understand. But you have to first get to the place of making something conscious so that you can change it and so that you can improve it and so that you can, get yourself back into a place of balance where things might be feeling like they're out of balance or like something is just not feeling right with you or you don't feel like yourself, for example.
Yeah. And I was curious about psychodynamic therapies and object relations. What does that mean?
I know, the jargon.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Just explain those to me a little bit.
Sure. So psychodynamic is kind of what I just sort of explained, but is also a larger umbrella term for most types of therapies that believe that the unconscious sort of informs the present and believe that exploring some realm of, your unconscious experience is going to kind of help you in the present. So depth psychology, object relations psychology, these are all kind of like under a psychodynamic umbrella. And again, there's sort of different ways of defining some of the different theories, but within psychodynamic therapy, it's a lot about how the past informs the present, whereas some other therapies are much less concerned with the past or have a kind of different conceptualization of the past. And then object relations therapy I love object relations therapy. I work from an object relations perspective and a kind of attachment based perspective, but it's the jargon behind it is kind of a little bit frustrating because it's basically, you can replace the word object with person. So it's really just about how people relate to each other. And Melanie Klein was one of the sort of pioneers of object relations therapy. And she kind of explained it in the sense of that it's how you internalize someone and how you kind of create a picture of that person that is kind of around the language of her using objects. So it's sort of like the picture of someone that you have and how you relate to that person, that picture, that object. So again, it's difficult for me to even explain the language around it, but at its core, it's about relationships, how people relate to each other. It has a lot of really interesting explanations for some of the psychological components of, attachment theory, which is a kind of a popular sort of pop psychology term right now in terms of, I don't know have you ever read this book Attached that everybody loves? It's a great book. Okay. I love it too. But yeah, attachment theory is a way to kind of explain different people's attachment styles in relationships. Are you anxiously attached? Are you avoidantly attached? And all of this kind of stems more broadly from object relations theory and attachment theory and how we all kind of, create a picture of someone as like all good or all bad, and like how it's difficult to kind of integrate a more holistic picture of someone and how we kind of have these mechanisms of splitting. And, there's a lot of interesting theories that if given kind of a clinical vignette, I could go through with you, but it's basically just about how people relate to each other and also kind of posits that we all have a need for connection and that our rejections that we've experienced in our lives shape us dramatically, and that, we're all kind of, looking for that acceptance and that sort of like sense of connection. So, yeah.
How much do you think is one of the issues is just listening? I feel like so much of our problems, quote unquote, are we just need somebody to listen, and the people in our lives aren't very good at it.
Yeah, I think that listening is a huge part of both, being an effective therapist, but also of being an effective partner, of being a good kind of friend, of being someone who is available and is, just trying to understand what the person in front of you is going through. I think that's hugely important. Yeah.
It's just, I've sent texts out to different people in my life over the last few months, and they're my friends, but I often I didn't get a response, like just checking in, and then I would call them like, hey, a couple weeks later and leave a message. But I don't know. I just think I'm relatively stable mentally, but I think it's really important when friends reach out or check in. Like, I know we're all busy. I know we have all these devices. I know we have email to check and 10 social media platforms to look at. And I think also we sort of like lump everybody into sort of like one, almost, it's not even a human. It's sort of like, it's all just incoming information. And we're just almost like we're like robotic in the way that we just, our typewriter, we just like, read it, next line, read it, next line. We're just like swiping. And I just think it's really important. And this sort of goes to my point about listening. Like, we have to sort of do those daily check-ins. Like, hey, did this guy John actually need something, or was it? It's weird. It's a strange phenomenon that's happened in the way that we receive information, and sort of differentiating from, is this a human being or is this just like another spam?
Yeah, no, I mean, as you were talking, that's what was coming up for me, is just this idea that we forget that when we're communicating with people, there's a person, like that we're all so busy that it is easy to kind of get a little bit wrapped up and not sort of treat people like human beings that deserve a response.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the listening component I think is huge. And I often remind myself of that if I'm ever feeling stuck with a client or I'm not sure kind of how to best help them, or I'm kind of maybe like hitting a wall with whatever, interventions I'm trying to use with them. I'll just kind of come back to the idea that at the very base, I know I can listen and I know I can listen well, and that is actually really powerful and really helpful. A lot of the times it has its limits,
Yeah.
but again, at the kind of core, psychotherapy is about the relationship between, two people. And it starts with that you have to really listen to people. So the one other thing I'll say about that that's so interesting to me is that I remember listening to professors of mine talk about different theories in grad school and trying to kind of, early therapist me, trying to figure out which ones made the most sense to me and kind of what I was most drawn to. And then they illustrated through statistics this idea that it doesn't actually matter what theory you use, that they're all about the same level of effectiveness, but that what is or maybe not exactly, but that basically the most important component of, quote unquote, transformation or having a positive therapeutic outcome is the therapeutic relationship itself, and that it trumps all the other statistics in terms of like the factors of if it's this type of therapist or if they're using this theory or that theory, and that what is the most important is the therapeutic relationship and the connection that you have with the person. So that always is helpful for me if I'm feeling like, what can I do and how can I, improve upon what we're doing in treatment. Is just like remembering that a lot of it is just about the relationship and really being present in that relationship does start with good listening.
The last couple of things I'm thinking, and I'll let you go. Do you ever have that moment after therapy? And I'm going to tell you a personal story, and I have to get your opinion about it. Do you ever have that moment like, oh, I wish I would have said this, or because you only have an hour or 50 minutes, or I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot at stake in just that hour.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the one way that I like to think about working with my clients is that it's a continuous conversation. And so, yes, from week to week, I work with most of my clients weekly. Week to week, a lot can happen, but typically we're working on pretty similar things. And typically we come back to similar themes in someone's life, or again, we'll kind of revisit how this person's goals are going, or, what's happening in this sort of arena of their life. And so it does feel like you can kind of pick back up. And even if it doesn't feel natural, another thing that I try and do in my work with clients which is kind of maybe unique to being a therapist versus in my personal relationships, I might not do this in the same exact kind of direct way.
Right.
But if, let's say, I said something that I felt like maybe didn't land well on the client, or maybe I felt like I offended someone or hurt someone's feelings, or, provided an interpretation that was a little bit maybe more challenging than the person was expecting, or something felt just off, then I'll bring it up and I'll ask them about how that felt to them. And, not in a defensive way, but I'll own the responsibility of recognizing that, maybe I did say something that offended them or that, hurt their feelings or something like that. And I'll try and work towards repairing that relationship. And it usually only deepens the relationship, because most people aren't offended by the thing that you think offended them. It's usually something that, at least for me, that I'm like overthinking, because I tend to overthink things a little bit.
Yeah.
Most of the times if I do bring up something, a client will say, oh, I had no idea. Like, what? I didn't think twice about that. But they usually appreciate the fact that, that I'm bringing something up. Or if there was something that happened and there was some kind of a rupture, it's almost always repairable with goodwill and with, again, like trying to listen and understand and trying to, again, own your part for being a human being that is capable of potentially hurting someone's feeling, especially in a super vulnerable space like therapy.
So I had to end with this. I just thought of the story yesterday
Yeah.
So I had a wonderful therapist in my 20s who I was diagnosed with a lot of anxiety. I was diagnosed with a autoimmune disease when I was in my teens. And it really, I'm knock on wood in great health now, at least physically. But it did create a lot of anxiety that I deal with still to this day. And I think that's something I think about a lot is, anxiety is kind of always there. I have sort of these hyperbolic anxieties about a lot of things. There's this powerful line in a Tom Petty song. He says, "Most things I worry about never happen anyway," which I think I always thought was really profound. So I had this great therapist, and then he got really sick, and I was probably seeing him for 5 or 6 years, and he got really sick with his autoimmune condition. So he referred me to his colleague, and she was much older. I think she was probably in her late 70s, and she was okay. But I wasn't connecting with her like I did with him. And honestly, I felt a bit of anxiety, and I was pretty troubled around that time because I felt sort of not neglected, but I did feel a little bit of like separation anxiety because he was somebody that I really counted on, and he was going through health issues, and it was tough. Because he really helped me evolve and helped me get through some anxiety. So then this older woman referred me to somebody that had just sort of graduated or like had just started her practice. And I think I liked her. She was pretty good. But we were in like our 4th or 5th, maybe 6th to 10th, I'm not quite sure exactly, session. And I'm talking, and she fucking yawns.
Sure.
I couldn't go back. I literally, and I could not go to somebody who's yawning in my fucking therapy session. And
sure.
And I remember her calling, because like a few weeks had gone by, because I was on a weekly thing. Regimen or pattern or whatever the word is, and she calls me, and she just checking in to see how everything's going, and just because I haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah.
And I don't know if sometimes I feel this strange urge to be honest towards somebody if they hurt my feelings. Like it's weird.
I don't think that's a strange urge. I think that's a healthy.
You think that's so? I remember calling her back, and I said, I don't know how rude or vitriolic I was. I mean, I was really pissed off, and I said, I said, you know why I'm not calling you back and why I'm not seeing you. I'm not going to see you anymore. Is because you yawned in our therapy session, and I felt so small and stupid, and I can't see you anymore. and she understood, and I said, maybe this will be some sort of learning experience for you, where to drink an extra Coca-Cola or coffee before class or before session. But I just felt like I can't. I just took that too personally. I don't know why.
Sure.
I don't know if I'm being completely ridiculous, but I guess sort of like to something I brought up earlier with you. I think that's such an intimate space, and
totally.
I don't know. Do you think I was being overreactionary, or we all have our own shit, and that's how I reacted?
Oh, I can't say. I mean, I would never say you're being overreactionary. That would be not my place. But I think that, kind of to my point earlier about, like you're saying, just the vulnerability of the therapeutic space, I think that it maybe would have been worth like trying to work through some of that with your therapist, because there is a really kind of prime example of you feeling, really hurt and, like you said, kind of made to feel small in this moment. And that is potentially a pretty important thing to work through what's kind of coming up for you in that moment with that person, with that person, not with an ex or a parent or whatever, but like with that person. And so that's again kind of this idea of using the therapeutic relationship as another component for change within therapy. And it doesn't always work. You could have gone back, and tried to have a session and like really hashed it out and still felt dismissed and like it wasn't a match. But I think that's the sort of beauty of the relationship, is that you get to have that honesty and you get to say, hey, you know what? I actually was really hurt when this happened. Is that helpful for this? Can we work it out? Or what do you think? So that would be my kind of take on that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think maybe I'll call her now. No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So where can people, I remember you always, it's funny, I like deleted my social media and then I like unfollowed everybody because it, like to your point, it became sensory overload, but I do recall you being really funny. Yeah. I think I don't know. I remember you being silly and goofy all the time, which I always thought was.
I appreciate that. Sounds good.
Yeah. So where can people find? I mean, I can always email this to you, but where can people find you online or like your website and et cetera?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I pretty much just have my public therapy website, which is GaeaWoodsTherapy.com. And it's spelled Gaea. It's a little bit of, it's the Greek spelling. I'm not Greek. I don't know what my parents were thinking, but they went with that one. And then I also still have my photography website, which is GaeaWoods.com. So you can check out my photography there. And then, all this talk of social media, none of my social media is public. It's all private. So I don't have like a therapy page or anything like that at this time. So I just try and focus on work stuff and just sharing photos of, personal life stuff on my personal space. So just GaeaWoodsTherapy.com and then GaeaWoods.com for photography.
Privacy, that's a whole other word and area that I just didn't.
I know. What is that?
Yeah, no, it's true. It's just it's crazy how it's just everything needs to be revealed. So are you doing photography right now, or that's sort of on the side?
Yeah, I am doing photography. I got a camera after 5 months of it being back ordered with supply chain and stuff. I'm really happy about my new camera that I finally got. I am doing some photography. I've been working on a book project for, a number of years. And it's sort of a joke that I even say that I'm working on it because it's, sitting on hard drives and sort of haunting me, but I'm allowing my life to lead me in different directions. But I do have a project that will eventually be completed once I finish it. And then just hobby, just like personal life photos with, for family, just for fun.
Do you still do like shoots and that, like out, like, like artsy?
I still shoot. Yeah. The portrait project that I'm working on is, it's Los Angeles based artists with their cars. So I want to photograph 100 artists and I've gotten to 77 is the number I've been at for a while.
I feel like I feel like I know about this project, or Jen maybe told me. I don't know. Is it
I've
something?
been shooting it for it's going to be quite an archive by the time it's completed.
Okay, so then you told me about it. Gosh, a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been going for a while. I've had a lot of life updates since I started the project, so it's kind of taken a back seat. But yeah, that's a nice portrait project that I've been working on for a while. So when I do those shoots, that's more of a sort of structured shoot, but otherwise I just shoot pretty casually.
Cool. Great. Yeah. Well, Gaea, it was really good to talk to you and see you.
Yeah, you as well. It's so nice that we get to do it over Zoom. I know people don't get to see the video, but it's so nice to see you in your space and to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was great to have you. Yeah, it's I don't know if it's a time thing. I could certainly, I edit video, but I think it's nice to just have an experience that's just for the ears. I think everything is so visually based these days. So,
yeah.
And I love listening to podcasts without having to see them talking. I don't know.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
But obviously it was good to see you. So, well, cool. Well, this will post probably like in a week or so, but it was great to see you and talk to you. And I think these are important chats to have now, and I thought it was cool to have a professional on the show and give their perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to hearing it and to continuing to listen. And I've got to order your book. Your book looks hilarious. It looks great. The first line or two after reading it, it took me a second to sort of get the humor of it. I wasn't sure if you were being serious.
Wait,
yeah.
Wait, where did you read? Like, I can just send you a copy. Also,
I would. Yeah, I think it was in. Yeah, you mentioned it in your podcast, I suppose, or maybe it was.
Yeah, no, but I was wondering
sure where I found it. Yeah.
No, but I was wondering where you read. Like, did you go on to Amazon or something?
Oh, I went to Amazon. Yeah,
Interesting. Yes, Gaea, come on, it's a satire. It's not.
Well, I realized that pretty quickly but in the beginning I was a little bit thrown for a second, but I realized quickly. Don't worry.
Yeah. No. Hey, what's funny? God, I'm sorry. I keep saying I'll let you go, but it's interesting to write satire because, especially with yoga in LA, because it's so ridiculous out here that it actually does seem real sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
wow.
I'd love to send you a copy. I'll send you one.
Oh, I'll take it. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, I'll email you, etc. But anyway, thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon. Great to see you.
Okay.
Bye.
Nice to see you. Bye.
Bye.